Drodzy Państwo, dobry wieczór. Bardzo prosimy o zajmować miejsca.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if I could ask everybody to take their seats, please. One brief housekeeping point. If anybody needs translation into English or Russian or Ukrainian, you can pick up a headset outside. The conference languages are English, Polish, Russian, and Ukrainian.
Взять наушники для перевода. Переводим с украинского на украинский, з и на. Украинский, польский, английский и русский. Спасибо. Да, пожалуйста, начинаем. Присаживайтесь. И наш вечер начинает и ведет Mikhail Fishman.
Okay, the moderator will be Mikhail Fishman, and I'm handing it over to Mikhail Fishman.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mikhail Fishman, and I am a political journalist from Russia, now working in exile. And we open third readings in memory of Arseniy Roginsky, the Russian historian, human rights activist, political prisoner, and co-founder of Memorial, one of the founders of Memorial. It's the first time our conference is taking place not in Moscow, and it's not a coincidence that it's taking place here in this special place, this emblematic place, Polin, Museum of the History of Polish Jews. And now I'm passing the floor to Krzysztof Persak, research associate at the Polin Museum and the Institute of Political Studies of Polish Academy of Sciences. Please? Yes, please. Thank you very much.
Dobry wieczór Państwu. Jest mi niezwykle
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to be able to welcome you on behalf of Poland, the Museum of the History of Polish Jews, at this conference, Historians in the Face of Catastrophe, readings in memory of Arseniy Roginsky, the co-founder and head of Memorial. You can't discuss Memorial or the Memorial network because it's a society that has branches in the autonomous republics of Russia and abroad. Their accomplishments in research, in documenting the repressions of the communist system, various aspects, multifaceted, studying the structures of the security apparatus, the perpetrators, above all, they were working to commemorate the victims of repression, those who were sent to the camps, those who were murdered. In Poland, we have special reasons to be grateful to Memorial for its Polish section, and I really have to mention Alexander Guryanov here, who indefatigably studied repressions of Poles in the Soviet Union. I don't remember exactly, but I think there were about 20 volumes edited by Zbigniew Kluza, an index of the repressed that were compiled by Memorial together with the Karta Center with tens of thousands of names of Poles who were repressed. A personal note. In the 14th volume of the Index of the Repressed Poles who were deported to Arkhangelsk, my mother's family name is mentioned, my grandfather, his brother, my mother, who was 6 years old at the time, and my grandfather's brother, who fled, who escaped from the transport in February 1940, and from then, since then, his fate was unknown. But recently, in the list of repressed in the Komi Republic, which was published by the Memorial, local Memorial, I found information that my grandfather's brother died in 1942. So thanks to your efforts, after my mother, the last person who remembers him, was able to learn 70 years after the fact what happened to him. Today, dark clouds have gathered over Memorial. We all know about the harassment, the repression, the hostility, the hostile action, the repression of Memorial by these Russian authorities, people who are proud to be the heirs, the successors of the NKVD and the KGB. Today's conference, however, proves that Memorial will not be broken. Memorial is alive. Memorial keeps working, and I believe the sun will shine upon you. In Russian, I think that there will be a celebration in our street, and this celebration of Memorial is something we're hosting here at Polin. Thank you very much for choosing this as your venue. We're very happy, and it's an honor. So hope you have a very successful 2 days.
And now, please, thank you very much. And now, please, the already mentioned here is Zbigniew Gluza, president of the Carter Center. Yes, thank you very much.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome. The fact that Arseniy Roginsky is the patron and the topic of this meeting in Warsaw is very significant. Arseniy is honored in the Garden of the Righteous in Warsaw. He has received the highest decorations and medals, and he always of Poland, and he's seen as part of free Russia, that part of Russia which is free, not only here but also throughout Europe. Arseniy was a person who set in motion, who was behind very programs we did together, fundamental programs like basic documentation of the Katyn massacre. In 1994, we signed a paradoxical statement with Arseniy saying what Poland and Russia should do to commemorate the past. And so the NGOs in our respective countries somehow took over the responsibilities of the state. We worked with Memory, and 30 years of cooperation was a response to the lies of the regime, and their historical policy has something to confront. We weren't able, however, to guarantee, to ensure peace. Now that it was announced that Memorial would be shut down, this was in November 21, we decided that in Warsaw we would support Memorial in Plac Konstytucji. There is and I think this can be used by International Memorial as well. These are resources. Memorial is a symbol of the truth, and we also would like it to be a symbol of victory in due time.
Thank you very much. Now I'm inviting to take floor Elena Zhemkova, the executive director of Memorial, International Memorial, which has been destroyed by the Russian state.
I wanted to say three things. I wanted to mention three things. First of all, and above all, I want to talk about Arseniy. This venue was not chosen by accident. Arseniy was a member of the International Auschwitz Council. He had many links to Poland, very special and specific links to Poland. This venue is also special because we visited it with Arseniy in September 2012, half a year before the opening of the museum. So the two of us attended a session of the International Auschwitz Council, and Marian Turski, a name that needs no introduction here, Marian said the museum isn't open, but I'll show you something. I'll show you around. Of course, the museum wasn't complete, ready by then, but we saw the wealth of the museum collection and what a wonderful place this is. I think that Arseniy would be happy that this conference in his memory is being held here. I want to talk about Memorial. Memorial was shut down. Our facilities, our headquarters were taken away. The building in which we had our headquarters was a special place for us. It seemed absurd, it seemed illogical. But now, a year into the war, when we're realizing that this site of truth, this place where human dignity is upheld, and where freedom and life and the right to a past, to remembrance and to learn the truth of the past are the values we uphold. So if we see Memorial as a site of dignity and memory, we understand why it had to be shut down, but it's only the Russian authorities who believe that Memorial does not exist. The Russian authorities, in continuing the persecution and repression directed against the Memorial, recently there were raids on the offices of Memorial a few days ago, so the Russian authorities are confirming in this way that Memorial continues to exist. And I also wanted to speak about solidarity. I see this conference as a sign of solidarity. When we received the Nobel Peace Prize, along with Ukrainian and Belarusian colleagues, we saw this as a sign of solidarity, as a symbol of the fact that the Nobel Committee and the world, and Poland as well, believe that together, that civil society, together with civil society, there's a lot we can achieve. Poland is a special place, and I think that for Polish people, the word solidarity has profound meanings and associations. And I think I see this this is something that affects me to the core, the solidarity that Poles showed towards the Ukrainians, because they remember that the world hadn't always shown solidarity with Poland, especially in 1939, and I think that in this solidarity there is profound truth. And that is why Poland, it's no coincidence that Poland is where the first conference of Memorial, after the Memorial was liquidated and after Memorial received the Nobel Peace Prize. The title of the conference, The Historian in the Face of Catastrophe, Historian in the Face of Disaster. This is also no coincidence. I think that Arseniy would like this as well, and he would have said, well, let's keep it up, let's keep going.
And now let's see a little part of a documentary about Arseniy Roginsky, The Right to Memory, and we will start our conference right afterwards.
Мне так мучительно неприятно всегда говорить о себе, кто бы это понимал. В 1962 году я закончил школу очень рано, 16-летним. Совершенно не понимал, что мне делать, где мне учиться дальше. Совершенно случайно и без особых привязанностей подал документы на филологический факультет Ленинградского университета. Меня не приняли, потому что я набрал слишком мало баллов. Я потом понял, что не потому, что 18 было слишком мало. По целому набору причин. Тогда отдавалось преимущество тем, кто прошел армию или имел какой-то рабочий стаж. Это же были хрущевские годы, у меня этого не было. Не стажник, не комсомолец, а к тому же еще и еврей. Что, в общем, имело тоже значение для поступления в университет в те годы. Хотя никаких прямых директив не было, запрещающих принимать евреев, но на самом деле евреев старались все-таки принимать поменьше, ограниченно. Вот. Но дальше мне просто в жизни повезло. Я увидел объявление, что, мол, те, кто хочет с баллами, полученными в Ленинградский университет, поступить в Тартусский, то могут прийти на собеседование в такую-то комнату, прямо в приемной комиссии, куда я пришел забирать документы. И я пошел, выдержал это собеседование, и меня с этими баллами приняли в Тартусский университет. Ну, в общем, стал я учиться в Тартусском университете, где быстро очень стал учеником Юрия Михайловича Лотмана, замечательного, тогда молодого 40-летнего филолога. Стал заниматься себе 18 и 19 веком, которым и честно и прозанимался до конца университета. Очень быстро двигалась история. Хрущев, снятие Хрущева, арест Синявского и Даниэля. Это же, хотя где-то далеко происходило в Москве, но также нас касалось. Перед этим еще и арест Бродского. И это тоже как-то нас касалось. Все это в наших головах как-то прокручивалось. И эволюция тоже была вполне характерна, потому что когда я поступил в университет, был издан «Один день» Ивана Денисовича, книга, которая оказала на нас большое, конечно, влияние. А когда кончил университет в 1968-м, это уже был «Вот войск в Прагу». После окончания университета я оказался снова в Ленинграде, где через несколько лет и я, и целая компания моих друзей, мы уже стали более или менее профессионально интересоваться вот тем прошлым, которым сейчас занимается общество «Мемориал». Потом придумали издавать сборник, посвященный советскому террору, воспоминаниям о нем, собирать документы стали. И это в 1981 году меня привело и в лагерь. Конечно, там с какого-то периода и довольно быстро стало мешаться КГБ. То есть надо было заботиться о том, чтобы к ним в руки не попали всякие эти исторические материалы. Но они к ним такие не попали. Вот этим мы больше всего были озабочены. Конечно, КГБ довольно быстро узнало о наших занятиях, до него это все дошло. Но сколько там, много довольно-таки обысков прошло. По дороге меня где-то выгнали с работы из школы, где я работал учителем. Есть люди, которые могут взять и эмигрировать. Могут. Ведь очень много хороших, прекрасных людей эмигрировало. Тогда, как эмигрируют и сейчас из России. Я чувствовал, что я не могу. Вот и все. Я не то чтобы говорил «нет, нет», я отказываюсь уезжать. Я таких слов не говорил. Они мне сказали: вот вам 10 дней на размышление. Хорошо, сказал я, и ушел. Но я понимал, что я не могу уехать. Это как-то... Тут же главное себе соответствовать. Себе. Между тем, и в 85-м, и в 86-м, и даже в 87-м я, в общем, еще не помышлял к тому, что я буду заниматься какой-то общественной деятельностью. Я вернулся из лагеря и просто набросился на академические научные занятия, ну, те из них, которые давали возможность прокормиться. Там я писал статьи в историческую, там, в специальную литературную историческую энциклопедию. И когда в 87 году целый ряд моих друзей, кто-то из них недавно освободился из лагеря, вот по этому последнему Горбачевскому освобождению, а кто-то уже давно был на воле, стали участвовать там в каких-то специальных таких свободных правозащитных семинарах, которые возникли в ту пору, я, в общем, особенно близко к этому не подходил. И сердце мое затронуло только рассказы, которых становилось все больше, о том, что существует какая-то группа молодежи. Она называет себя словом «мемориал». И я прочел их воззвание, и оно мне очень понравилось. Они говорили о том, что необходимо не только поставить памятник жертвам террора, но и создать свободный, общедоступный архив, музей, библиотеку, создать центр, который был бы центром изучения террора и центром, который бы гарантировал нас, страну, от того, чтобы террор не повторился. Вот где-то в мае, в июне, я сейчас точно не могу сказать, 88-го, вот посреди этих занятий, все-таки кто-то меня пригласил на встречу этой группы. И объяснил, что встреча будет носить сугубо такой характер, ну, профессиональный. Они будут думать о том, как надо опрашивать бывших заключенных. Мы пошли туда вчетвером. Лариса Иосифовна Багарас, Сергей Адамович Ковалев, и Саня Даниэль, мой ближайший друг, и я. И мы действительно увидели группу очень симпатичных людей, которые правда думали, как им разрабатывать анкету для опроса политзаключенных. И это мне показалось страшно дельным, не болтовней, потому что тогда уже появилось очень много перестроечных болтунов. Они говорили, все время говорили какие-то красивые слова, к чему-то призывали, а вот то дело, которым подумал я, и я бы занялся, ну, если бы был одним из них. И я остался и вступил в вот эту группу. Ну и до сегодняшнего дня я в мемориале. Ситуация трудная для нас. Нужны десятилетия, многие десятилетия работы многих таких институций, как мемориал, многих тысяч разных просто людей, которые работают в эту сторону. И прежде всего самого государства, для того, чтобы идея человеческого права и достоинства и о месте человека в иерархии человека и государства стала массовым сознанием. Пока что нам в этом смысле приходится трудно.
So that probably gives an idea of, for those who didn't know Arseniy Roginsky, of who he was and what is Memorial. As Lena already said, that it's a significant title of the conference, A Historian Facing Catastrophe, and it's also the title, the name of the first, I don't know how to call it, roundtable, panel, whatever it is, the first part of our conference today. And to start it, I invite participants to take their seats. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lyudmila Ulitskaya, the Russian writer and social activist. Andrzej Frischke, Polish historian and lecturer. A specialist in history of communist Poland and author of many books. Irina Scherbakova, historian, head of the board of the Memorial Scientific Information and Education Center. And Ralph Fuchs, a political and public figure from Germany, member of the Green Party. So I will be Okay, so I will just start with a couple of words because I knew Arseniy Roginsky and his teammates from Memorial quite well. I was following as a journalist their work for quite a while, for many years. And for me, Roginsky was not only just a historian of the Stalin's terror. For me, he was more than that. He was a political mind, I would say, a political person, a leader in a way, because what he was trying to do, he was transforming his studies of history, the preservation of memory, which Memorial is for, into a political platform, into some way into the future, to connect the story of your past with what may lie ahead of you. And his main message, his main point, has always been the same. It was that we as Russians, because that's who we were and still are, we have to understand that, and the Russian state has to acknowledge that it was not the Russian people or some evil force or not even Stalin himself who brought this pain and suffering, murder upon millions of Russians, and as it has been already mentioned here, not only Russians, and everyone in Poland, of course, knows that. And not until it happens, this path forward will be open, that the Russian state has to recognize that it was the state who was the main perpetrator and the organizer of the Great Terror, of the repressions. That was his message. As he says in this little excerpt from the film, as you all heard, this was a difficult work. Let's say we all didn't succeed in make that happen. It didn't happen yet. Russian society didn't recognize that. Russian state didn't recognize that. And now it's the same state and the same idea of state, which the sacred state, the unchecked state, the totalitarian state, the absolute state, the state which governs the people, not vice versa, which now stands behind this criminal war that has been brought by Vladimir Putin upon Ukraine. It has been already mentioned that it's now difficult times for Memorial and members of Memorial, because the second wave of repression and terror has been, the new chapter of terror has been opened. There are 2 legal criminal cases opened. There were less than 2 weeks ago searches and questions and the full-scale repression against Memorial, and this is because what Russian state is still trying to do is to eliminate memory, and we see that it's a difficult, if possible, task. That's why it's still trying to succeed. And Lena already said that Arseniy would just say, "Let's keep working," and that's would be his message today. But we are now here to explore what it actually means to keep working when we all live through the catastrophe. And with these words, I will please ask to Lyudmila Evgenievna to start with probably some remarks. Thank you very much.
Гуманитарий и война. Кто был первым гуманитарием на свете? Мне кажется, что первым гуманитарием можно назвать того человека, который оставил в пещере знак своего присутствия в виде процарапанного рисунка.
Who left the first humanitarian or humanities person in the world, in my opinion, was the person who left the first drawing on the wall of a cave. It was not writing yet because there was no alphabet. It was just a drawing. Among many things that make a person different from an animal is the ability to transfer information. And those drawings on cave walls were the beginning of human history. So the first humanitarians were the hunters and the artists. They were actually the same people who have invented the first weapons, the clubs. So their speech was in drawings, so the artist was the first humanitarian. Humanity is fighting against the world. This fight has not finished yet, although we seem to be winning over the animals, because the number of animal species that have disappeared was around 15,000 by 2020. So we could say that humanity is successfully fighting a war against the animal world. The second aspect of a war is war between people. These wars have existed since the earliest times, and mostly were wars about territory and natural resources. The war and catastrophes encompass human history. The ones to record the wars were not soldiers, because those were usually illiterate, but educated people, humanitarians as we call them today. The early testimonies that were preserved to this day concern the 30th century before Christ. So it's the humanities, people, the humanitarians, who often had to justify the wars, but they were also the first ones to realize what the wars are doing to humanity. Half a millennium before our time, Herodotus wrote, "Nobody should be so crazy as to want war instead of peace, because during peacetime the children bury their fathers, but when there is war, it's the fathers who bury their children." Today we know that behind almost every warrior there were humanitarians, humanitarians, teachers. The best example is probably Alexander the Great, whose empire covered the ancient Egypt, the Persia, part of India, and his teacher was Aristotle. So there are humanities behind every warrior. They build new generations. They shape the people who we call administration today. So in the final result, they were personnel of rulers. How did it happen? I don't know how this turn happened. I don't know. It is beyond doubt, though, that as science developed and as scientific achievements were included in public life, the role of humanitarians changed, especially if we include scientists among humanitarians. Achievements of science have become very important in war. I mean, chemical war, nuclear war, that were tragic applications of science. And it was the humanitarians who were involved in those achievements. They were the first ones to understand the threat to humanity that stemmed from it. And thus Robert Oppenheimer, called the father of the hydrogen bomb, advocated international control of nuclear energy. In what situation is the world today at the beginning of the 21st century? According to some calculations, the nuclear weapons available on Earth is sufficient to destroy the Earth, not once, but 5 times. 9 nations, 9 states, starting from USA and Russia through to Pakistan, own nuclear weapons. A single push of a single button and the whole world goes away, is destroyed. So how can we prevent the apocalypse? Only by the joint effort of the entire humanity, of those who appreciate the miracle of life on our planet, those who want to save the world of plants, animals and people from the fire of nuclear war. Today we know how thin is the border between the classic war with tanks and guns from nuclear wars. We all know the tragedy of Hiroshima. We all know that the radioactive material is leaking from places where it is produced and stored. So what can humanitarians do, people who are used to reading books and writing articles? What can we do? We are people of the word. Only thing we can do is combine all our efforts to eradicate wars. Even if the war is considered just or liberating, humanity has reached the point in which all the emerging problems can be solved via negotiations, peaceful negotiations, if there is a will to do so. One of the most important books of the humanity starts with the words, "In the beginning there was a word," and this was the word of the Creator. Let's take it as a metaphor. Humans had no contribution to creating life. There was a creator or nature or whatever factor you find acceptable. Nonetheless, the very existence, survival of the life on the planet and the planet itself depends on how nuclear energy that was discovered by humans is going to be directed. Everybody understands that, and it is the job of humanitarians to do whatever they can in order to prevent the nuclear war. What can we do? We need a planetary humanitarian control over all nuclear weapons on the planet. This is the only thing that will save us from dictators and rogue states. And there are such international organizations present. Nonetheless, their influence in the world seems insufficient. The control over political extremists feels necessary. And we either do it today or we will never do it because we will have no time.
Людмила Евгеньевна, можно я вам сразу задам один вопрос?
May I ask you a question right away?
С кем сегодня российский гуманитарий должен говорить? С кем сегодня российский гуманитарий
humanitarians talk to these days? Who should be our partner for discussion? Should we talk to the Russian society? Should we talk to the world? Who should we talk with? Well, I believe that the role of the humanitarians does not change with time. And Russian humanitarians in 1917 said the same words we could repeat today. I mean, Rosen's anti-war, Berdyaev's anti-war speeches, those are very well known throughout the 20th century. So I do believe this line in Russia is strong, and there is a sufficient number of people today who work in that direction, and they think and they do everything they can. Unfortunately, those people very often find themselves in very difficult circumstances, as it is happening now. Some of them had to leave the country. Nonetheless, these people exist, and I do have a feeling that they do not less today, but more. Fortunately, the young people whom I'm able to observe really fill me with hope and good feelings.
If anyone wants to add something after the remarks, please do so. Irina, may I ask you now to join us?
Yes. Да. Ну, я бы так сказала.
Well, I would say that Lyudmila Ulitskaya is looking at this situation a little bit the way you would look at it from Mars. But if we go back to today's situation, if we are to talk about why we named our conference the way we did, Historian Facing a Catastrophe, it is very relevant and very terrible. So if we are talking about a historian who specializes in 20th century history, if you are one of those historians, you are in a tragic situation today. So regardless of the optimism that I heard in the speech by Arseniy Roginsky, my last discussions with him were very tragic because the memorial was disbanded. I mean, it was difficult to imagine what would be happening today, but nonetheless, 2014 had already happened, and the war was already going on in the East Ukraine, and we were named a foreign agent. He was a very down-to-earth person. He was always able to focus on tasks for today. Nonetheless, he asked me a question. He said, "What do you think?" I think we lost, after all. What did we lose? And this is a question that we ask ourselves, or I ask myself this question. I'm sure that many of my fellow historians ask themselves the same question. We've been asking it for a long time, but this year it became particularly acute. It was difficult to imagine. And it is a very simple issue. I mean, all those things that Arseniy Roginsky talked about right now on screen, what Memorial has been doing for 30 years. It was about enlightenment. I mean, of course, we did research, yes, but it was all about enlightenment. It was written on all our banners. So this gave us the opportunity, this gave us the ability to work. It gave us hope in the darkest times. During the Brezhnev period, it gave hope to many of our friends in Eastern Europe We believe that if people learn the truth, if we tell the people the truth, if they learn about the crimes that were being committed, if it is being spoken out loud, it's not possible for this experience to go waste, to go wasted. And this was our task. We believe that people could not remain unmoved. So this was our task for all these years. So what could and should a historian do these days, in these times? Well, those things that are going on, this horrible, aggressive war against Ukraine, I mean, this war is directly related to a number of historical reasons. I mean, historians are deeply involved in forming the ideological grounds for this war, because this war is being explained and excused by the fact that Putin and his by what Putin and his ideologists considered history. So this was a horrible mixture of venomous myths and conspiracy theories, completely false ideas, completely fantastic explanation as to why Ukraine has no right to be a state of its own. So what should a historian do in this situation? Because not only we have encountered this horrible role of, well, quote-unquote history, because obviously what they are using is not the actual history, not as scholars understand it, but what can we do? How can we reach the people? Given all that. And of course we do see the demand. We see how not only historians turn to experience, and our entire work, the work of the memorial, is an example of this experience, given all the mistakes that we have made in 1990s and all the things that we tried to do and things we thought we were succeeding at when why we did not actually succeed. We were witnesses to how fast the society, the Russian public, has, in fact, in its majority, rejected what we called processing the past. They have refused, they have rejected this necessity. I mean, it is difficult for historians to come up with metaphors and buzzwords. It's difficult to get people interested in the meaning of history. So it is not by accident that books of Vladimir Sarukin were so popular. No history books could ever compare. And if people were reading anything in Russia, one of the most popular books was 1984 by Orwell. So Sorokin, as he was talking about, I mean, he used this metaphor. He said that in 1990s, end of the 80s, it turned out that this horrible past is a corpse, it's dead. But it is lying on the road and it is not being removed in any way. So it is this rotting, decomposing object. And it's just there, rotting, even though enormous efforts were made to remove it. We could have undertaken those activities only with the help of broad public and the state, and this should have been the main task of the community and the state, because when it was not done, as you see, this rotting corpse has become Frankenstein monster before our eyes. And now we find ourselves at mercy of this Frankenstein's monster. So it is a difficult and thankless task to think about what happened in the 1990s. Where were the red lines that were set by that were drawn by the society? Because we kept thinking that maybe Russia has a chance to become a democracy. But then there was the Chechen War. Or maybe it was even earlier, maybe it was in 1993. Or was it the KPSS process which ended with nothing in 1992? Or maybe it was even earlier when it became impossible, when the archives were closed, and so on and so on and so forth. This path is very specific, very informative, and very tragic. And just one more thing, which I believe we are going to discuss today. This is partially related to what Lyudmila Ulitskaya said. We were witnesses, and we have tried to prevent it. But how has it become? How did science come to be doubted, including history? Because why do we need science? I mean, we heard it often. Why do we need science? Who needs history? Who needs historians? I mean, what are historic facts? They can be always interpreted this way and that way and another way. And that rejection, the loss of faith in scholarly knowledge, in the need for scientific proof and for knowledge of facts. Look how this horrible ideological campaign was launched when the war with Ukraine was over. I mean, nobody named and nobody referenced any fact, nothing. There were just quotes taken completely, taken out of quasi-philosophical works, and that was it. So this deep despise of science, of fact, this played a very important role and a very bad role. Let me repeat. Things that Memorial was doing all those years, it was always a segment of our work with the past. Political repression, we were dealing with political repressions, the histories of individual people, and we kept trying to do that. And we wanted to juxtapose the real facts, real knowledge about the fate of millions of people, about the mechanism of terror, about this mass terror and anthropological catastrophe that Russia has undergone. What heritage did it leave, what legacy did it leave behind, and how come it just doesn't work? And we thought that at some point this truth would be supported by many people who supported us. And over the past 10 years, regardless what, we were supported. And then it turned out that our efforts were insufficient. That the society, that this tier of the public that we were addressing was very thin, and that the task of enlightenment, education, could only be achieved if they were combined with a very deep awareness of the state to what needs to be done to remove this rotting corpse of the past and deep institutional reforms that were needed but were never implemented. But what should we do?
But what can we do? We were dealing with the past. However, then we were thinking of the future, and for the future we were aware of the risks and the tragic dimension of the events around us, what is happening in Russia today, and what Putin's regime is introducing. And this is the last thing I want to say, what Putin's regime is putting into the heads of the citizens, of the people, is a past, an unreal, fabricated, mythological past that never really existed. It's a terrifying reenactment. And so he's trying to convince people that it's supposed to endure forever, just like the war is expected to go on forever for an unspecified, indeterminate period of time. And I think that our effort, we need to work together. We need to work with history, with historical experience, look back to it, acknowledge our mistakes, compare, own up to everything, and see what happened in one country which had a dictatorship and a country with another dictatorship. So that's all that remains for us today. Thank you very much.
Ирина, можно я сразу попробую уточнить, пользуясь привилегией, что я веду?
Irina, taking advantage of my prerogative as moderator, let me ask an additional question.
Рогинским, когда он вам сказал,
You quoted your conversation with Arseniy Roginsky when he said that we seem to have lost. I'm looking at Dmitry Medvedev, who's reading telegrams by Stalin on Russian TV. And it reminds me of what happened 10, 12 years ago when Medvedev, convinced by Memorial and Roginsky, tried to carry out de-Stalinization in Russia, and it's clear that we lost on that front. But what do you mean by we? Who are we? Do you mean historians? Do you mean us as a society? Do you mean us as civil society? So what do you mean by... Well, first of all, as regards Dmitry Medvedev and the de-Stalinization program, since you mention it, I wanted to say that the program that's the program that launched Memorial. It was a program that was very widespread, very, very extensive, and the program of de-Stalinization, this project, involved a legal analysis and of the atrocities of the crimes committed by the communist authorities, because that's what this hasn't been done yet. Okay, you see Stalin this way, we see Stalin this way. We have our own interpretations, and because there is no assessment, that's why we weren't able to finish the work. If there's no legal assessment, there can be no narrative, and there's no social narrative, and in education, in the school books, and so on. So it's not reflected. If there's no narrative, if the narrative doesn't go out there, a narrative that would be the state version of events, which is why this program, which was convenient, was brought down to commemorating the victims. And that's also very typical, this hybrid nature of Putin's ideology of the regime,
почти что уже и невозможно. Но ведь она же такая была, это же была такая уловка. Такая тоже для людей. Это была
it
такая
was
матрешка.
a clever
Вот,
trick.
пожалуйста,
It was a Russian
у нас
doll.
всё есть. У нас, с
So,
одной стороны,
okay,
мы
take a look. We've
революцию
got
17 года
everything.
осуждаем, а Ленин
We have the
осуждает.
1917 revolution,
Вот у
which
нас
we
плохо
condemn,
это
deplore,
нет.
but Lenin's still in the mausoleum. Victims' terror are bad. So many people were killed, but Stalin won World War II. So we will continue to raise monuments to Stalin. And this inconsistency, this watering down, this dilution, this blurring the concepts of morality, of ethics, fundamental values, good and evil. And that led to normalizing the coexistence of various approaches. And as for the question whether we lost or not, so this is where I would see this is how I'd answer your question, who lost? Even in society, there are people still living in Russia. A large part of Russian society has left the country, but there are people still living in Russia who are holding on to their values, who are deploring the war and Putin's regime, who are critical. But this is tragical. This is tragic that the majority of public opinion has turned out to be, or I'd say that the majority in a dictatorship, in an aggressive dictatorship, that it acquiesced to it, that it let it happen, that it allowed this to happen, this dictatorship to grow, to be imposed upon itself. And this is what I'd see as a failure.
You to join us, please, with probably... yes, Ralph, may I ask you to join us, please, with probably a more practical perspective?
Oh, so I'm the practitioner here on the...
Looks so.
Okay. First, thanks to Memorial for inviting me. I think it's also due to the fact that I knew Arseniy for more than 20 years, and we had been working quite closely together. He was a kind of spiritual mentor also to me. So let me start with a personal remark. When I came today from Berlin to Warsaw and started thinking, what should I say tonight? The title of our conversation was not very clear. I felt that this is a very sad and almost depressing moment. Yeah? If you're looking back to all the hopes and all the struggles of the Russian human rights movement, Memorial, and all the other democratic initiatives, intellectuals, and now this catastrophe of the war, and now Russia turning totally into kind of totalitarian, militaristic state, no legal space anymore for the democratic opposition, a lot of them in jail, on the prison colonies, and most of them in exile. This is a very bitter moment. But when I saw the documentary with Arseniy and Lena and all the others, I had a very strange feeling, almost a moment of joy to see Arseniy again with this kind of stoic attitude that we cannot allow to fall into despair. and that there is no fatalism in history. Be prepared for the unexpected and work for the unexpected. And you cannot calculate the outcome of history kind of as a mathematic model. And when Arseniy and his friends started to build Memorial in the late 80s, continuing the work of the early dissidents in Russia, maybe there was a moment of hope and some windows were opening, and some fresh air came into this Soviet Union, but nobody could expect that the Soviet Union would collapse 3 years later, and that there would be a real chance for a democratic process in the country. So when they started to work, it was almost against all odds. Yeah, it was the principle of hope. And let's just do what we must do. To be true to ourselves and to be true to our values. And then we will see. And for sure, this war is not the last word also for the future of Russia. Thanks to the Ukrainians. I will come back to that in a moment. And another remembrance to Arseniy in one of our early conversations. I'm coming from the radical left in my early years, and we've been talking about socialism and democracy, And what I'm still very impressed of is that Arseniy was very clear about the crucial importance of the rule of law. The rule of law that maybe is the guarantee of last resort between civilization and barbarism, and which makes a difference between a state which is responsible to its citizens and, as Augustinus said, a state without law is just a bunch of robbers. And if you look into the current war, it is not just the brutality of any war and the human catastrophe of any war. It's this totally absence of limits. This unrestrained brutality, this unrestrained violence, which is conducted by the Russian military, the Russian army, and this is lawlessness. And when Lyudmila was talking about war, I had some ambivalent thoughts and feelings. Of course, I agree, Lyudmila, that every war is a tragedy. Every war is a human catastrophe. But not every war is as evil as the other one, and not every side in the war is in the same way guilty. And I'm saying this as a German, as a child of the generation which set free an unprecedented amount of barbaric violence in Europe, and which had to be defeated by war. And when I'm looking to the current public debates in Germany about what should be our policy, what should be our attitude to this war, should we send heavy weapons to Ukraine? Should we assist Ukraine in winning this war? We have a lot of different voices. And the so-called peace movement in Germany is opposing the delivery of heavy weapons because they say it will only continue the war, it will only continue the suffering. Let's make peace immediately. Stop the war immediately. Stop it at any cost. And the consequence of this pacifist position is that Ukraine should surrender. So I know this is a risky statement, but peace is not the highest value. It is freedom and human dignity. And we should not talk about war dissected or disconnected to its concrete historical and political context. There are justified wars and there are deeply unjust wars. There are wars of aggression and there are wars of defense. And not every conflict, not every war can be solved by compromise and dialogue. I doubt that this war can be solved by compromise and dialogue. There is no compromise between totalitarianism and democracy, between the rule of law and the law of jungle, between equal sovereignty for every nation and imperial dominance, and between a free and independent Ukraine and Putin's revisionist agenda. So Ukraine must win this war by military means. And only when Ukraine will get the upper hand military, you have a chance for negotiations about a fair and just peace. And I would even say only a military defeat, should I say of Russia, or should I say of the Putin regime in Ukraine, will open a window of opportunity again for the other Russia, which is represented by Memorial and the democratic opposition. So I think we should be clear that the fate, I would even say the fate of Europe, not only the fate of Ukraine and Russia, is depending from the outcome of this war. And this is a very existential test case also for the ability of liberal democracies in Europe not to fall back in the historical mistakes of appeasement. You will not win peace by appeasement. who have to assist Ukraine to win this war in the interest of a democratic and free Europe.
I still have a follow-up question to your very strong message. You were talking about military defeat, which would might open the window for other Russia, your words. But there are military defeats and military defeats. And yes, Irina was talking about working with the past, and that's a load that Germany has come through, the work that Germany has done. But, and one of the condition for it was set by the military defeat. But it's still hard to imagine that kind of military defeat.
Of course.
So Ukraine might occupy territories and defeat Russian military on the battlefield.
On Ukrainian soil.
On Ukrainian soil, yes. But that wouldn't mean the defeat, might not mean the defeat of the regime and the start of the work that Russia as a nation has to go through to bring this opportunity to become this other Russia. So what would you say?
First, thank you for the clarification. When I'm talking about defeat, it's of course not conquering Moscow. It's a totally crazy idea. No, it's defeat in Ukraine. And enabling Ukraine to free its territories and to push back the Russian army behind the international acknowledged borders. Maybe the most tricky thing here is Crimea. I will not speculate about the ability of Ukraine to free Crimea, but I think if Putin would lose Crimea, this would be a decisive blow and would weaken its authority in a way that he would not remain in power for the next years. But this is, of course, a speculation, and many of you, most of you are probably much better prepared to answer this question. But I think the crucial thing here is how to get rid from this kind of imperial syndrome. How to turn Russia from an imperial dictatorship or an authoritarian empire to a modern nation state. Russia is the only remaining empire in Europe, the only remaining colonial state. And the attack against Ukraine is a kind of a neo-colonial attempt. And I cannot imagine that the departure from this imperial mania could happen without a defeat in Ukraine. Whatever then will happen, nobody of us probably can predict it. And whoever will follow Putin in the first step, maybe personally will be even worse, although I hardly can imagine to be worse than Putin. but it will be a weaker leader. And this will open probably some space for change on the medium term in Russia. We are constantly discussing with our Russian friends and partners what are potential scenarios of change. And I'm not a follower of this kind of fatalistic school that Russia is doomed forever to be this kind of authoritarian, anti-liberal society. And I think things can change, and in the 90s you could see there is the potential for change. And meanwhile, there are probably millions of Russian citizens, and most of them are still there, who have experience with civil engagement, with campaigning and organizing, and also a certain degree of courage, although you cannot see much of it now. So I'm not a pessimist, but I'm quite sure that this war and the outcome of this war will also be of fundamental importance for the future of Russia.
Andrzej, please join us if you may.
Słucham z uwagą tego, co
I am
Państwo
listening
mówią.
attentively to what you have
Zgadzam
been
się ze
saying,
wszystkimi
and
słowami, które
I do
przed
agree
chwilą.
with the words that were just
To,
spoken
co
right
się
now.
dzieje pomiędzy Ukrainą a Rosją, to, co się
What
dzieje
is
w Rosji,
happening between Ukraine and Russia, what is
ma
happening in
znaczenie
Russia,
nie tylko dla Rosji, ma
is important
znaczenie
not only
dla
for
nas.
Russia, it is important for us.
Jak się potoczy dalsza również nasze dzieje, nasz
It is
zakres
important to
wolności,
how our
praw,
history will
jak myślę, do
continue,
całej
what would
Europy.
be the scope of our freedoms and
Od
our
wyniku tej
laws,
wojny
our
zależy
rights.
szalenie dużo.
It's true for the entire Europe. A lot hangs on the result of this war.
Zastanowić nad tym, dlaczego
I
w
will
ogóle
try,
stało się
however, to
możliwe.
consider
Znaczy,
why it even became
ta
possible.
wojna i wcześniej ten
This
reżim
war and previously this regime, Putin regime,
i ta agresywność,
and
te
this
najgorsze
aggressiveness
kłamstwa,
and the worst of
które są po prostu
lies
niewiarygodne.
that are simply
Można nazywać
impossible to believe.
nazistami.
I mean, you can call Ukrainians Nazis,
Nie, i to przechodzi.
and you know, people buy it.
To nie wywołuje, że tak powiem,
It does not give rise
że jakiś jest absurd kompletny.
to a statement that it is absurd. I mean, how is it possible that
I
it's
właściwie
happening?
mam wrażenie, że
So I am really
znajdujemy się
under
w
the
takiej
impression
sytuacji,
that we are in a situation
że pamięć
when
II wojny
the
światowej,
memory of
która
World
w
War
zasadzie
II,
uformowała jednak
which
kilka pokoleń,
really was a forming experience for a number of generations. It formed a number of generations. This has disappeared. It stopped influencing the awareness and the value system.
znaczy w
And
pokoleniach
let me
starszych od
stay on
tych,
this
które
for a
są
moment.
dzisiaj w naszym wieku,
Generations older than ours,
nasze i może troszkę
our
jeszcze
generation,
młodsze,
maybe a generation a
w
bit
zasadzie
younger than
przez
us,
opowieść rodzinną, przez kulturę,
through
przez
culture,
sztukę,
through
przez
family storytelling, through
kształtowanie
film,
wyobrażeń i pojęć,
shaping
w jaki
ideas
sposób
and
sobie
notions,
ułożyło pojęcia dobra i zła
we
w
have
obszarze
somehow
historii, w obszarze życia państwowego.
sorted and categorized good and evil within the area of history and state. Of course, it was often inconsistent, and it also pertained to countries that were ruled undemocratically, like Polish People's Republic, say.
Niemniej jednak
Nonetheless,
pamięć wojny
the memory of war
i Holokaustu,
and of Holocaust
zburzenia Warszawy,
and
i
of
Oświęcimia,
destruction
i
of
obozów
Warsaw and
koncentracyjnych.
Auschwitz and concentration camps.
To była świadomość, że to był czas najgorszy.
That was, I mean, we were aware that this was the worst possible time, and nobody denied that, even those who were on the side of the dictators. They did not deny that. They didn't say we would continue that tradition. No, it was part of the normative order for them to declare it evil. And thanks to that, all the activity of the democratic movement was possible. Dissident movement in Russia, certainly our democratic opposition, which was demonstrating the inconsistencies of the regime that we were struggling with. I mean, if we recognize the standards of human rights, of civic rights, the right to living in peace, the right to personal growth. Well, of course, the social order should be adapted to that and the sense of the international policy. We should go in the appropriate direction. And basically, as I look at the 60s and 70s and the 80s, even those who were conducting the policy that we see as bad, they were still doing it. They were still declaring the need for peace, the need for disarmament. And I don't think it was entirely cynical. I think it was dictated by the fact that they had to refer to a certain social public memory. So they couldn't use any other buzzwords. They had to convince the public that they are going in the right direction so that we can avoid evil and cataclysm and so on. Because they referred to the memory of war, the 6 million victims in Poland, the ruined cities. I don't know if it was the same in Soviet Union, but I think it was. Given the accents, the emphasis on the ideas of peace in the propaganda. Of course, it was all very Pharisaic because they did many things that really did not serve that concept, but they were referring to that in the normative order. And this was the hope of the democratic opposition and the dissident movement. Let me remind you about Sakharov. He wrote the entire treaty about peace. So him and many others, as well as our democratic opposition, and the methods of operation that rejected violence, vengeance, speaking of peaceful methods of acting, of lies being inadmissible as an instrument of action, about the need for the rule of law and human rights. Out of this thinking and these values in Poland, the Committee for the Defense of the Workers was born, and after that, Solidarity. And the entire path that led us to 1989 and the emergence of democratic, sovereign Polish state with the rule of law and the friendship with the nations that surround us, not looking for aggression or forcing the humiliating admission of guilt for what the previous generations did, or the imaginary guilt, or guilt for imaginary things that those generations did not really do. All that was possible because we wanted to live in peace and we wanted to live in the world of equal rights, building bridges.
And the fact that the Soviet Union, that Gorbachev came to power in the Soviet Union and headed down the same road from a desire for confrontation between the blocs, between states, between ideologies, to highlight, to emphasizing a desire for cooperation, dialogue, looking for rules for a common world and a common world order, and thanks to that we were able to regain our freedom. And we mustn't forget that the efforts of the Polish opposition of solidarity would have ended in a defeat, would definitely not have ended in a victory if it weren't for the changed international situation, one aspect of which was Gorbachev's policy. And this opportunity, this is a chance that Poland fortunately seized with the wise policies in 1989. The decisions made in 1989 were allowed us to build an independent state, to reconcile, to have reconcilement with Germany, Ukraine, Lithuania. We also wanted to reconcile with the Russians. It was difficult working with Russia, but not difficult working with Memorial, and that cooperation exists to this day. So why is it that, why did it go this way? How can we explain it? Why did things go the way they did? I'd put it this way, it's a process. I mean, the most extreme manifestation is what's happening in Russia and the war, but the traces, the residue of poison is scattered, it still exists in various countries, including Poland. What is this poison? First of all, I think it's the poison of absence of memory. We're forgetting, oblivion. And memory is also the fear, that the concern that something awful will happen again. So we're witnessing, there's no inhibitions. The things that are stopping us from setting goals, using venomous language, using propaganda, extreme propaganda, that strips the adversary, the enemy, of dignity, that would have us kill the enemy, to crush them in moral terms at least. Historical knowledge is also fading away because it's not passed down through the generations in the right way. I mean, it's difficult. We have new media. And this, in turn, means that you can fabricate any vision of the past you please. You can invent a past, the past. We see different versions of this desire to reinvent the past, and for certain groups, for certain individuals, Putin, especially Putin in particular, this has become an ideology, a rallying cry. It's become a promise of a justification of what had been bad in the past, which can be redacted, but you can also rub out, you can erase the opposition, the victims of tragedies, the victims of war. You can spin the war as a game. You can forget about its victims, you can make war appealing, and various processes are becoming more intense through mass culture. For years now have been, and this is followed by historians having less influence by those, especially if they're inconvenient, especially if historians tell inconvenient truths. If they talk about obstacle, like things like dignity that hampers this military spirit. if they talk counter to this sense of outraged innocence or innocence, because that's what people like to hear. People like to hear and stop or silence those who would say something inconvenient. This process in Russia occurred a long time ago. Let me recall the notorious story from 2009. I'm sure you remember. It was in public space, in Russia's public space, that they announced, disclosed documents that had not been available previously about how Poland in 1939 allegedly caused the outbreak of World War II. So, and the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact was not of fundamental importance, but on the contrary, it was Poland. I mean, Poland seizing part of Czechoslovakia, which led with joining in the Anschluss of Czechoslovakia. So Putin didn't back these claims explicitly during his stay. During his 2009 visit to Poland, the ruling party, the present ruling party recalls this visit or shows footage of this visit every few days, but it was an important visit when Putin came to Poland in 2009. What made the visit important was that Putin condemned the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, as if cutting himself off or distancing himself from the military historians in Moscow who were saying that the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was unnecessary because it was Poland that actually was responsible for World War II. So we had a moment, there was a time when it seemed that perhaps this promise of positive relations and peace between nations would prevail. The years to come, we know what they brought. There's no need to recall that. The question is, what do historians do with all that? And of course, I can't come up with a clever, convincing answer. It's something we're all thinking about. I'm sure historians shouldn't lie, that's for sure. Historians definitely shouldn't falsify, misrepresent history. They shouldn't abet, help regimes that use historical falsehood as a means of gaining power, influence, and building undemocratic societies, imperialistic states. We, as historians, should try and oppose this. But what we say will not always ring out loudly enough, but we need to keep at it, we need to keep going. I'm not saying that this is a universal formula, but perhaps this sense of the gravity, of the significance of the law, of truth, places like the ones we're in now, like this museum, or associations like and in the most difficult and associations like Memorial, which has weathered difficult times. This might be a source of hope, but things are bad. We're facing powerful forces, and I feel that there's a lack of true, real interest, historic interest in history, because after all these years, 80 years since the beginning of World War II, it's no longer memory. that shapes this interest. Instead, there is a space for reenactment, for games with history, with facts. You can look at alternative histories, alternative versions of events, and there's a very dangerous tendency in world learning, in the philosophy of history. That's something historians have to contend with. So when challenging, questioning historical fact, denying the existence of historical truth, those proponents of this school have something else in mind. They're talking about the limitations of language, the limitations of culture. But there is the possibility of making this concept of vulgarizing these concepts to the end. Consequently, what happened, it doesn't matter what happened, what matters is what we think happened. And then we start, it depends how we think, it depends on our approach, our ideology, on our objectives, but this leads to utter relativism, which is dangerous, I believe. And this war, this propaganda, Putin's propaganda, and the language in which the words used to describe the Soviet Union and Ukraine, and everything related to that, this shows how dangerous it can be when we depart from the conservative rules that something is true and something is a falsehood, distinguishing between true and false. And it's the historian's job to determine what happened and how, in what circumstances, and try to convey this knowledge and try to disseminate this knowledge. That's the most we can do, frankly, but it's what we should be trying to achieve.
I have to admit I was struggling with the translation, but I think I still got the message. You were saying about the social order in Soviet times and Soviet era in Poland and also in Soviet Union. I remember it as a kid, and I remember this message about peace, this social message that the socialist government was bringing to the Soviet people, and I remember it was distorted, perverted, nobody actually believed in it, but it still was there. Now it is a totally different reality and a totally different kind, looks like a totally different kind of political regime when, I'm not making this up, you all know that if you will step out to the street in Russia with the word peace, you will get detained and arrested. And this is this Orwellian dystopian universe that has been built in Russia. So my follow-up question would be, whose, again, basically the same, whose mistake was that, and how we, I don't know again who we are, but we allowed it to happen when we had these hopes in the early 90s and late 80s, and now are part of this Orwellian dystopian world. Yes, okay, sure. Yes, it's probably broken. All right. Yes, please.
Пока. Почему, как произошло то, что отказались, так сказать, от мира?
How did it happen? How did
ну, мы уже, мне кажется, мы так сказать, об этом говорили. И, ну, я еще тоже хочу сказать, что я согласна с Ральфом.
I wanted to add that I agree with Ralph
сейчас очень много
появляется
разных
there are a lot of articles and a lot of thinking, a lot being written, very pessimistic narratives that have built up that what happened to Russia was inevitable, and there's this fatalistic view that it was all prophesied, it was all to be expected, and this historical pessimism to the effect that there's no way out of this rut, this pattern for Russia. Nobody knows where it will end and how. I agree with Ralph in that there is I agree with Ralph that what Stalin was accused of, or that actually, it was alleged that Stalin, the Hegelian comment that history that history doesn't know conditionals, that there's no point what if, saying what if. This is something that I think affects all of us. Of course, for us as historians, it is important to see, to identify the possibilities, the turning points, and why it didn't work, what was done wrong, what could have been done differently, what the windows of opportunity were. And for us, this is crucial. What happened to the world, what happened to war and peace, I think we've already said, we've already been talking about that. And I think that, as we said previously, there was a resilience, or there was immunity. What people experienced in the first part of the 20th century, the Soviet Union incurred great, terrible losses. The terror, it paid a price. The terror, World War II. It was, so there was often an ill-considered, so actually this led to some sort of humanization. They assumed the position was that enough is enough, that we don't want any more victims, never again. War is a tragedy, war is but concurrent to this, there was a propaganda, a vision of war. There was another position, another mindset, and when this new ideology began emerging, which became increasingly nationalist, this alternative narrative prevailed. It won out. War was seen as only in terms of victory, and this war and this victory became an icon of an impeccable, with no untarnished and with no bad sides. We drew attention to this. We spoke about the danger of how dangerous it was to focus exclusively on blinding people only with this victory, that this victory became a totem, an icon. It became increasingly militarized. You know what happened to May 9th, Victory Day, and how Victory Day became a celebration of aggression and brutality. So, and instead of, but perhaps never again is a rallying cry, is a slogan that we should, instead of saying never again, in victory parades focused on military potential, military capabilities. So all this laid the ground for this war of aggression, this aggression that began, or that became more it escalated last year. Of course, there were the war in Chechnya and the brief war with Georgia, which was also which anticipated what developments in Ukraine, and which foreshadowed what would happen in Ukraine. So we saw what was going on, also Syria as well, and all of it increasingly altered the way it changed the way seeing peace as a key value, and this is what led us to where we are today.
You want to add something? No? Okay. No, if Lyudmila Evgenievna, well, our time is, I would say, up. If I may, I would add. As a political journalist, I follow Russian political landscape for all Putin's years, and now this war, and everything what comes with it, and there was mentioned this imperial syndrome, which is probably exists in Russia. But I just want to add that what I feel from my work as political journalist, that it was not it probably added and helped and allowed this syndrome, this war to happen, but it was not the syndrome that started this war. Because I know a very simple fact that if a single independent voice would be allowed in Russian parliament, just one among 450, just one voice would exist, this war wouldn't happen. And that means that it is tyranny and absolute power that has brought this war upon Ukraine. That is the main driver. Though, again, of course, grievances and frustrations after this happy future didn't happen in the 90s. They, of course, and they were nurtured by propaganda, and it all added up. But still, I know from my work, and that probably gives me hope that imperial syndrome is, I don't know, it's probably difficult to defeat, but tyrannies can be defeated, and we know that. So that helps me to do what I do. Thank you very much, everyone here, for this roundtable. Thank you so much, and I would right now we will have.
Yes, Mikhail. At the bottom, no.
No, not this one. No, I think it's here. Yes, we have a concert.
Yeah.
We'll have a concert, duet Maniucha and Ksawery, and then after they will be finished, we in the museum hall there is installation of graphics by Ukrainian painters Matvey Weisberg and Karine Arutyunova, which you are very welcome to look at, and there will be also a fourchette. Thank you very much.
А тудою їде, да вже хлопець п'яний, отчини ворота, бо ти ж моя пані. О, я не пані, я є господиня, є й у мене плутен, повинна я скриня. О, я тая скриня, блахою й обита, та я в ній постілька, шовиком й обшита. А на тій постільці п'яний хлопець ляже, й у правій рученьці дай ту дочку держить. Та йду дочку держить, юду дочці грає, мене молодою дома споминає. Ой, бором-бором, дай боровиною, то тудою йде, той березиною. Ledwie matka wydała na świat syna, a już przyszedł czas, żeby się z nim żegnać. Idziesz, synu, w daleką drogę, szukaj swojego losu, uważaj na nocowanie w ciemnym lesie, uważaj, żebyś nie zgubił swojej drogi. Мати сина дай породила, місяцом й обгородила, а зорою подпаразала, а зорою подпаразала, в доріженьку віпроважав. Їди, сину, в далеку дорогу, їди, сину, в далеку дорогу. Дай по щастя, по добру доль. Ю дорогу кременистою, у дорогу кременистою. Дай не роби ночлів на дорозі. Janiczka temna, osinia Janiczka temna, a nam do rіженька треб. Згубимо, да не втрапимо, згубимо, да не втрапимо, найдемо чи не найдем. Już zagrali muzycy na podwórku, już przyszła kapela, skrzypce, cymbały. Wstawaj, ojcze, to już dzień ślubu twojej córki. Chciałbym bardzo, ale leżę głęboko w jamie, moje oczy schyliły się już na północ. Pomogą ci, córko, bracia, siostry i niech Bóg ma cię w opiece. Moje oczy patrzą już na północ. Oj, zagrali muzyczeńki й дворі, розбудили батейка у гробі. Устань, устань, батейко, із гробу, бо вже твоя донейка їде до шлюбу. Ой, ради б я, моя доню, й остати, навернули сиру землю не подняти. Схилилися карей очі до півночі, нехай тобі, моя доню, Бог впомочи. Ой, заросла могилонька травою, поражайся, моя доню, з сестрою. Ой, заросла могилонька терником, поражайся, моя доню, з братиком. Схилилися карей очі на всі ночі, нехай тобі, моя доню, Бог впомочи. Нехай тобі, моя доню, Бог впомочи. Бог впомочи. Chciałam jeszcze jedną zaśpiewać dzisiaj piosenkę. Te, które dotychczas Państwo słyszeli, były zasłyszane przeze mnie w jednej małej wiosce niedaleko Żytomierza od kobiet, które siedziały wieczorem przed domem i śpiewały pieśni ze swojej młodości, pieśni wiosny, wesela, pieśni o losie. Ale jedną jeszcze pieśń chciałam zaśpiewać, która pochodzi z południowej Rosji, z okolic Woroneża i oryginalnie opowiadała o smutnej Maniuszce, która wszyscy tańczą, wszyscy już są w korowodzie, a z jakichś powodów ona jedna się smuci i nie tańczy. Adaptację tekstu zrobił Marcin Wicha. Więc tak zabrali nam dziś świat, jakby ktoś nie zapłacił rat. Żal, że to tak, żal, że to już, żal, że Maniuszce przepadł świat. Żal, że to tak, żal, że to już, żal, że Maniuszce przepadł świat. Już zna Maniuszka strach i złość, żal to codzienny teraz gość. Żal, że to tak, raz, dwa, że już, że zna zmartwienia strach i złość. Żal, że to tak, raz, dwa, że już, że zna zmartwienia strach i złość. Lecz ma Maniuszka szczęścia łód, bo dziś znalazła ziaren ciut. Żal, że to tak, raz, dwa, że już, lecz dziś w szufladzie ziaren ciut. Żal, że to tak, raz, dwa, że już, lecz dziś w szufladzie ziaren ciut. Więc dziś Maniuszka będzie siać, by garść tych ziaren wiośnie dać. Rzeżu, rzeżu, rzeżuchę siać, by garść tych ziaren wiośnie dać. Rzeżu, rzeżu, rzeżuchę siać, by garść tych ziaren wiośnie dać. Więc tak dziś zamiast pól i kniej musi Maniuszce starczyć mniej. Rzeżu, rzeżu, rzeżuchę siać, trochę rzeżuchy i już lżej. Rzeżu, rzeżu, rzeżuchę siać, trochę rzeżuchy i już lżej. Rzeżu, rzeżu, rzeżuchę siać, trochę rzeżuchy i już lżej. Rzeżu, rzeżu, rzeżuchę siać, trochę rzeżuchy i już lżej. Dziękujemy. Maniucha i Ksawery. Ja myślę, że akurat czas. To dla nas ważne, że właśnie tu mogliśmy zagrać. Dziękujemy.